right. Thank you. We are now being recorded. Dankeschön. Okay, so what we do is loaded with significance, but also challenges. Challenges that the halakha up until the 13th century never even thought about. Okay, so when you take on a whole world, you make your life more complicated. And things that might have seemed to be fairly simple and straightforward now assume tremendous significance. Okay, so this is hypostasis. And we talked about numbers, and we talked about God's name, and we talked about all sorts of things, okay, that are all based on the concept of hypostasis. I want to introduce a new term this evening, and that is a theurgic icon. Theurgic icon. Anybody want to tackle that? Well, let's do the easy bit. What is an icon? A symbol. What sort of symbol? A religious symbol. Perfect. Classical Greek is Debbie's forte. It's a religious symbol. But what is the theurgy? Theurgy is the manipulation of God. Now, we talked about this when we talked about idolatry. Classical idolatry says you do a certain thing, God has to respond. What did Bilam do? Bilam said to God, I've built the 7 altars just like you want. I know what you like. And by the way, there is a wonderful midrash that talks about Moshe and Bilam. And do you know what it says? Well, I will tell you. It says, I see where we got the Matterhorn in the background up there, Shmuley, right?
Yeah, yes, it's much cooler here when I have this.
Cool. Exactly. He's got the Matterhorn. He feels cool. Excellent. Moshe was God's minister of state. He presents God's politics to the world. Bilam is God's butler. He knows how God dresses, what he eats, how hot his bath has to be, and how well done his toast has to be every morning with his marmalade. Bilam is the butler, and he knows God intimately, knows how to play on him. Moshe presents the ideas, politics, the vision for the world, okay, including his cats, I see. So, this is the difference. Bilam knows how to play God. He says that Sheva Mizbechot Arachti, Va'asim Parva'ayil Ala Mizbech. I've done all this. Now let me go. And this time, God says no. Okay? Bilam is in tremendous shock. His reputation is in his mouth. It's always worked. Okay? Ki yadati ket asher tevarech muvorach v'asher taor you are. I know that this works, says Balak. But this time it doesn't. Because God can do things differently. That's as much as I want to say about theurgy. Now, theurgy isn't necessarily a bad thing. You're not necessarily wanting to manipulate God to do evil. You could want to manipulate God to do good. And don't we often do that? Baruch Hashem, in Yirtzeh Hashem, would that God would help us or do something good or make the world a better place. Now, if you can actually do something about that, using a religious symbol, say your tefillin, okay, then that would give you power. That would give you power, and you would be able to do something good for the world, perhaps just by putting the tefillin on. A Jewish soul connects the tefillin, and it does something, okay? So I want to put the phrase theurgic icon into your mystical vocabulary together with hypostasis. Now, this works beautifully for the Zohar and for Kabbalah afterwards. If we've got something the Talmud in the Gemara or the Midrash to give us a basis for that, this is very important. And when you study the Zohar at depth, you realize that what it does, it's taking little bits and pieces of Talmud, Midrash, and working them up into, by virtue of hypostasis and theurgic iconography, into something very powerful that makes everything you do in mitzvah life of tremendous import. And I'm going to read the Gemara in Masechet Brachot, Davav Amud Aleph. You don't have it. I'm just going to read it out. Probably many of you have learned Masechet Brachot, and you probably did stop and wonder about this particular piece. Amar Rabbi Avin bar Avad Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Minayin she'akadosh baruch hu meniach tefillin. How do you know that God lays tefillin? Now, does this begin to sound familiar, Jean?
Yes.
Sure. God wears tefillin. Did you know that, Brian? Well, now you do. Okay. Shenemar, because it says, Nishpa Hashem biyimino ubizroa uzo. God takes an oath by his right arm and by his right hand and his arm of might. Biyimino, right hand, zot Torah, shenemar miyimino eshtat lamo. At God's right hand, an eshtat, a law of fire, was brought on the world. We know that from the laning on Simchat Torah, Shemini Atzeret Simchat Torah. Uvizroa uzo elu tefillin. And what is the mighty arm? Tefillin, shenemar Hashem oz lamo yiten. Oz is God, and Oz is also the tefillin arm. How do we know? Shat tefillin oz hem l'Israel dichtiv v'ra'u kol ha'amei haaretz ki shem Hashem nikra alecha v'yaru mimeka. Again, in Sefer Dvarim, when the people see your tefillin on your head, they'll all be in awe of you. I'd say very loudly, halavai. But this is a very powerful Talmudic idea. The Zohar makes a big deal of this. V'tanya, Rabbi Eliezer Gadol Omer elu tefillin shebarosh. It is the tefillin on the head which are exposed. Amale Rav Nachman Rav Yitzchak Rav Chia bar Avin. Hani tefillin damari alma maktivahu. So what's written in God's tefillin? Well, first of all, what's written in our tefillin? 4 parshiot, which are, don't be shy, and Kadesh Li. Shema, Vayam Shamoa, Vayaki Viacha, and Kadesh Li. What's written in God's tefillin? And just finish the pasuk. Goy echad ba'aretz.
Prof. Sinclair, you can use the screen now.
Thank you. I don't need it to use it yet. I anticipated this, Yael, so we're going screenless for another few minutes. Yisrael goy echad ba'aretz. That pasuk comes from Divrei Hayamim. By the way, who is like your people, Israel? There are unique people in this world. Okay, that's what God's tefillin has. Umi mishtabeach kutsha berechu b'shivchayu d'Israel. And does God really want to have this relationship with Israel? We praise God and say, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Eloheinu, and God praises us and says, Mi ka'amcha Yisrael. Yes, there is a symbiotic relationship here between the Jewish people and God. As it says in Devarim, Hashem he'emircha hayom, okay? V'atem he'emartem. God is for you, you are for God, we are together in this enterprise. אני אעשה אתכם חטיבה אחת בעולם, אתם עשיתון לי חטיבה אחת בעולם, שנאמר, שמע ישראל השם אלוהינו השם אחד, ואני אעשה אתכם חטיבה אחת בעולם, שנאמר, ומי כעמך ישראל. Now, if we were learning the Gemara, I want to think about this, we'd say, okay, it's a nice idea, because God doesn't really wear tefillin, does he? And he doesn't really have a parsha on parchment saying, but it's an idea that we know that just as man seeks God, God seeks man, or should I say people. God needs people to talk about him in this world, and we need a God so that our life is filled with meaning in this world. So we'd say, isn't this a lovely symbolism, okay? A metaphor. That's certainly how the Rambam would read this Gemara. But, what does the Kabbalah do? It takes it much more literally than that. God wears tefillin, and it's, as it were, we wear tefillin. God wraps himself in his tefillin. We wrap ourselves in our tefillin. Our tefillin and God's tefillin are the same kind of idea. So we are in a way God, God is in a way us. Tefillin become something very powerful and very potent indeed. Now, the name of God is in our tefillin, the shel rosh, rather than the combination. Where do we have the dalid, the strap at the back of the neck? Remember, if you are a Sephardi, then your strap at the back of the neck has 1, 2, 3, a yod shape. And even Ashkenazim will sometimes be persuaded by the sofer not to go for the square, the 4 bits, but the 3 bits that make a yod. Okay, and then we have the dalid, we have the shin. Shaddai is our tefillin. Okay, Shaddai, one of the very powerful names of God, Shaddai. So we are walking around when our tefillin are on with a theurgic icon, something that resonates with God, God shares with us, and we'll see soon how the 10 sfirot are in our tefillin. Okay, so all this is a bit like going around with some divine laser gun to shoot anybody down. Of course, as I said, halavai, all right, doesn't quite work like that, but this is the idea. So what we have also is an idea of erotic unity. We've talked about that in terms of the sexual imagery, the kruvim, and everything we talked about last time. What's the last thing you say when you put on your tefillin shel yad? Men, I assume. What is the last thing you say?
What does
Ve'erastichli mean?
I will expose you. I will
What?
Betrothed, I will betroth you, isn't it?
To be betrothed.
Betrothed.
Erusin. This is marriage, coming together, unity, male and female, the Shekhinah and Hakadosh Baruch Hu, Malchut, Tiferet, and Malchut. This is the world of the Zohar. Verastich li l'olam, verastich li b'tzedek u'v'mishpat u'v'chesed u'rachamim, verastich li be'emunah, ve'yadat et Hashem. What is Yidiyah? Ha'adam yada et Chava ishto. Intimacy. Did you realize that that was all packed into what you're saying every day when you put on your tefillin? Brian, you look as if you're in total shock. Okay.
I'm coping.
So
He's just about coping. He's still able to breathe.
it's obviously quite erotic, isn't it, that whole thing?
Exactly. But were you thinking about that, putting on a tefillin over all those years? But it's not erotic in the bad sense. It's
No.
erotic
Well,
in
you
the
use that
sense
word.
We're bringing about things that happen within that complex state of affairs, which is called God at large. Ein Sof is out of the picture. We have the 10 Sefirot, okay? And the relationships between them. You are a theurgic iconographer, making changes. This is power. And that's why the whole world is in awe of you.
Is that why Chabad makes such a business of the laying tefillin?
And that's why Chabad will take any Jewish soul, if they can, off the street, put tefillin on them, even if they think they're eating donuts, okay? It doesn't matter. It is this theurgic iconography. You dress a Jewish soul, which is in a body, in tefillin, which is God and human being wrapped up together. You're producing change, and they believe in it. They believe in it so that they will go anywhere in the world, pull people off the street, and put the tefillin on them if they can, and they're doing something. Do we see the actual result? We never do, of course, because this is all a matter of faith, and this is why a mystic is a mystic. But I'm just trying to explore the world of Kabbalah with you. So, the list, of course, goes on. Muzuzah, Tfilin, Shabbat, Chol HaMoed, Kiddush, everything we do, okay? But of course, there's going to be a tension arising between the mystical significance and the halakha. After all, halakha is primarily about mitzvot, okay? What we do and what we don't do. Kabbalah has brought in a whole other world. What happens when there are conflicts, when things don't mesh together neatly? Do we decide according to the halakha? Do we decide according to the Kabbalah? Or do we try and make some sort of compromise? And what would Rabbi Yosef Karo do? A great halachist, but also a mystic. We'll talk about him next week, okay? An amazing world which combined the Kabbalah of Tzfat, our Lecha Dodi, and Ana B'Koach, and Sfirat HaOmer, and all of that, together with the major halachist, the major legal architect of Jewish law. So let's start with our tefillin. Take things which we do take for granted, but we've probably never really thought about. I'm going to begin with a section from the Zohar. And that is in our share screen, which we are now going to go into. Okay. Now, I'll do the Aramaic. I'll do the reading this evening. Kam b'tzafra, line 6. You get up in the morning. Mavarech kama bircha'an. You make a few brachot. Anach tfilin b'reishei. You put tfilin on your head. Bein inoi, between your eyes. Bein einecha. Doesn't literally mean between your eyes. We know it's the place on top of the forehead that corresponds to between your eyes. By lezikpa reishe. Now, and when you want to raise your head, chami shema kadisha ilah. What you see? The name of the Holy One, the highest Holy One, achid v'rashim al reishe, unified and marked on your head. Shaddai, Dalet, Shin, Yud, all of that stuff, it's all there. Uritsuin talyan mehai gisa o mehai gisa al libei. The straps go down to your heart. Well, at least on the left-hand side, all right? So, ha-istakal bikara damare, and you have looked at the greatness, the honor of God, the yakar damare, ha-moreshelo. Oshit yadoi, when you pull out your hand, you got the tefillin shel yad on your hand, okay? Chami, you see, yada achra, the other hand, mitkashra bikushra de shmei kadisha. The hand is again connected because of the shin you have, okay? And the daled at the bottom of the bayit of the shel yad. Again, the name of God. Ahadar yadei, and when you put your hand back, what have you looked at? Kvodo shel hakadosh baruch hu, hayakar shel mara de alma, the master of the universe, Zohar. So this is a theurgic icon. We are together with God. God's name is all over us when we wear our tefillin. So let's have a look at Rav Ezra ben Shlomo, one of the Kabbalists of Gerona. You may remember how the chain worked. The son of the Raavad, Rabbi Yitzchak Sagi Nahor, in Provence, then to Spain, was a famous Kabbalist, passed the tradition on to Rabbi Ezra and Rabbi Ezrael in Gerona. These are the Kabbalists of Gerona, and the Ramban Nachmanides is a student of Rabbi Azrael, and in the 13th century, he is the first major commentator on the Torah who starts to include Al Derech HaEmet, in the way of the truth, which is the Kabbalah, based upon the Zohar. The Ari isn't on the scene. So he said, Sarichat aladat, line 9. You have to know. Inyan tam tefillin. What are the tefillin all about? Arba batim shel rosh. There are 4 chapters, and they're each in separate sections in the shel rosh. We've got Kadesh Li, which is Inyan Chochma. That's the sphere of Chochma. Shniya Inyan Bina. Litbonen b'tzeat Mitzrayim. Vaya ki yiviecha. Okay, the din of the Bechor, because of the exodus of Egypt, the firstborn. Shlishi Shema hu avat chesed. That is chesed, that's love of God. Kabbalat ol malchut shamayim. Revi'it vayayim shemoa midat hadin. That's gvura. Remember, 1, 2, 3, 4. And therefore, the small has the tefillin on the left hand because it's gvura. It's the sphere of gvura, which is din. And that's the left-hand side because that is harsh, as opposed to the right-hand side, which is love. Kulam mitnakzim l'sfira chamishit. We've had 4 sfirot, chokhmah, bina, chesed, and gvura. We need a 5th. So the 5th is the one in which they all drain, which is Tiferet. Tiferet, if you will remember, is the partner with Malchut. So when you join through the Yesod, okay, when you bring about unity between Tiferet and Malchut, otherwise known as HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Shekhinah, whereas HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not Ein Sof, Shekhinah is not Ein Sof, but these are again aspects. Then we produced, if you like, a Hieros Gamos, and we're on the way to mystical perfection. All right. Kulam mitnaksim l'sfira chamishit tiferet shu olam ha'atzilut. And this is Atzilut, delegation. How God eventually transfers down the chain of Sfirot his presence into the world. V'zeu v'haya la'ot al yadcha shekatuv behei. Now the funny thing is that commandment in Parashat Bo about tefillin, it spells the word yadcha very peculiarly. That's correct, Jean, right? V'haya la'ot al yadcha, there's a hey after the chaf, should be a final chaf, your hand. Why a small chaf and a hey? Now the Gemara says yad keher, the weak hand, that you know you put it on the left hand. But the Kabbalah says ki hi sfira chamishit. That's because the tefillin, the whole importance of the tefillin is in the 5th sphere. Kol hayud sfirot nitkashru bo. It is that union, okay, in the 5th sphere that brings about significance, importance to all of the rest that makes sense of it. That's God's special name, which unifies everything. One name to unite them all. Lahavdil elef havdalot, of course, from Tolkien. V'chen kara ma she'esig Moshe Rabbeinu alav hashalom kesher shel tefillin. Now, what's all that bit in Parashat Kitisa that Moshe asks us to understand God? Okay, ladat. And God says, you cannot see my face. Panim, of course, in Kabbalistic terms, is the perfect constellation of Sfirot. The Zeir Anpin says, no, but you can see me, Binikrat Hatzur, from behind Achorai. What's God showing according to the Gemara? The Kesher Shel Tfilin. God has Tfilin. He's showing him that little, which is why the Kabbalists and most of the Sofrim will try and convince Ashkenazim to have a Dalet shape at the back of the nape of their neck and not the square shape. You have to be really stubborn to persuade, especially an Israeli sofer, to make you a shalosh. Just check yours tomorrow morning. What shape do you have on the back of your neck? Is it a 1, 2, 3, which makes a Dalet, or is it 1, 2, 3, 4, a bit like a Rubik's cube? If I can say that again. Lahavdil elef. Havdalot, check. True Ashkenazim have a Rubik cube, and most of us have been persuaded by rabbis or the Sofrim to go for the Kabbalistic Dalet. This is God's Kesher Shel Tfilin, which he showed Moshe b'nikrat hatzur. Ki kol asfirot nikshru bo, okay? Hakashur beruach hachamesh hasfirot hatachtonot. So when we are wearing tefillin, This is, by my God, it is a theurgic icon. So it's a whole different world. Yes, Jean, speak, do not
Apparently,
point.
he
Just
had
speak.
Rashi's tefillin.
Sorry?
Apparently, according to the enumeration of the Parshiot, it was Rashi or Rambam's tefillin, and not
Rashi.
Venutam's tefillin.
That the order here does, in fact, you're quite correct, Rashi's tefillin. Yes. Okay, that's not something we're going to talk about now, but if you want, I'll mention it next week. Okay, Iberavoch. All right. So this is from the Ktav Yad, Parma, 1390. Now, 15. Mashmaut hamusag ot. Now let's have a look at something else. Okay, just to do with Rav Kook. Rav Kook is a Kabbalist, of course, but he does everything very nicely. So the tefillin is also called an ot. Okay, that's not unusual. It's found in the Gemara. These are the so-called outward signs we were taught in Cheder, otot, the outward signs of the Jewish religion. Tefillin is one of them. Mashmut hamusag ot, hina siman sheba lechaven et mabatenu v'haskalatenu el mashum sheme'ever lahasaga ha'enoshit. Rav Kook says, of course, your theurgic icons are there to direct you to things above and beyond the tangible world. ישנו עניין מסוים גבוה מעל גבוה, שרק מתוך ההתבוננות במצוות אלו וקיומן נוכל להבינו. אולם יש שני סוגי אות. But there are two types of significance in the ot. There is חיצונית ופנימית, an external ot and an internal ot. There is one which is easy to understand, and there is one which is more difficult. Tfilin hen ot chitzonit, hanaseit al yedei adam. Now Rav Kook says, the sign of the tefillin is something we make. We do actually take the hides and we write the parshiot and we put them in the tefillin. Therefore, it's an ot chitzonit. But there is another ot, which is not done by humans, but by God. Shabbat v'yom tov, hen yamim shabehem mofia kedusha atzmit, umimele zeu yom menucha. They take us out of this world because they are otot, which are initiated by God, and they require an absolute divorce from the physical world. המלוכה מבליטה עובדה זו שהקדושה לא תלויה במעשה ידינו, אלא היא יצירה אלוהית. Rav Kook has a lot to say about this, but we're beginning to go into the aspect of ot. There are different otot. Tefillin is called an ot, Shabbat is called an ot, Yom Tov is called an ot, okay? So if we have a look, if somebody wants to say something, shoot, say.
Hey, well, it's Dafka, the Kiddush is ot li le'olam, not out of this world.
No, lo olam is forever. It's a matter of time.
Oh, it's not.
Ot hi lo olam.
Okay.
Far ebig, as we say in French, forever and ever, for eternity. Okay.
Netzach.
Exactly. All right. Now we've got that straight. That's good. Now that's Rav Kook in Midbar Shur, which is a very mystical book of his. But let's read the Radbaz. Now Radbaz lived in Egypt in the 15th century, wrote many tshuvot, a major pillar of halacha, Rabbi David Ben Zimra, okay? שאלה שאלת על מה סמכו העולם לחלוץ התפילין בתפילת מוסף ראש חודש. And now we all know this, we all do it, men, of course. We wear tefillin, and suddenly Rosh Chodesh comes, and instead of going with the tefillin until the end of davening and taking them off, what do? We take off our tefillin before what?
Before Musa?
Yeah, why?
It's the Yontef.
It's a yontav. Why can't you wear tefillin on yontav?
We don't do.
And who told you? And who told you? So let's just have a look at and also you started off wearing tefillin, Ian, for all of Shacharit. You wore them during Hallel. You wore them during naming. Why are you taking them off just before Musaf? Musaf does indicate the special nature of Rosh Chodesh, true, okay? Because we talked about the Musaf, the additional offerings on Rosh Chodesh, but it's, you know, kind of something to reflect on. Tshuva, Radbaz says, first of all, you should know. Nowhere in the Gemara of the Poskim does it say anything about taking off the tefillin on Rosh Chodesh before Musaf. This is in the 15th century, of course. This is the Radbaz. Hanimtzayim etzleinu. V'dimtza b'sefer Elkanah. There's a mistake. It should have been Sefer Hakana or Hakaneh of Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana, the famous mystic to whom we attribute all sorts of books like Sefer HaBahir and all of that. Al HaMitzvot, and the Sefer Hakana is about the mitzvot. Says some weird things there, which we'll see shortly. V'alav samchu v'nagu kulam lachlot ha'tfilin. So this is the basis. There's a line in the Sefer, the mystical book Hakana, that says, take off your tefillin before Musaf. And even though people don't know why, what they saw, some of those guys who are into Kabbalah, they take the tefillin off before Musaf. So you're looking around in Shul, you see some famous Kabbalists take off their tefillin before Musaf. What do? I want to be a Kabbalist too. Gam hem osim ken. Mitzvat anashim melumada. They don't know what they're doing or why they're doing it, but they're just copying, okay, without any reason. Gilchata belotama. Radbaz clearly doesn't think very highly of this, okay? It's like a halakha that has no reason. Why are you doing it? Aval hu zanatan tamel, of course. Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana gave a reason. Once you say the Musaf, you're talking about the special sacrifices on the day. And that's where Rosh Chodesh begins to look a bit like Yom Tov, where we also have a Musaf with special sacrifices. And Yom Tov is called an Ot. Rosh Chodesh is not. Okay? So that is when the plot thickens. So in order to point out that perhaps Rosh Chodesh is also a Ot, therefore, we're going to make a significant difference. Tefillin are called keter because keter, the top sphera, covers everything. And in Musaf, you say Kedushat Keter. Now, the Sfardim say Kedushat Keter. Do the Ashkenazim say Kedushat Keter? No, they don't. But Keter is very Kabbalistic. Now, this is where your Kabbalah starts to get you a little bit complicated. If we're going to say Kedushat Keter, and Keter is being supported on an Ot day by the day itself, which is the Pinimi Kedusha rather than the Chitzoni, you wouldn't want to produce a clash here between the Chitzoniut and the Pnimiut. You're going to do something terrible in the Sephirotic realm. Again, the danger of sanctity. You're going to start getting things wrong, so you can become very neurotic about that, and you have to do something to change the nature of your theurgic icon. Okay. Let's have a look at 26. Do you say Kedusha if you're davening by yourself? Yes or no?
No.
No. But even the Yachid who's davening, there's no Kedushat Keter. Zman haraui leketer. The time of Keter is here. Ra'ui shelo yu al rosho tefillin. Tefillin should not be on his head. So, before I let you speak, Ian, I'm just trying to give you some little taste of the fact that when you're really into Kabbalah and everything you do about your religious life, especially the things which are icons, okay? They are things that we do, we make, we put them on every day. You have to take into account all sorts of complications. So if there is a mystical significance in the tefillin, and they are called Ot, and if there's a mystical significance in Rosh Chodesh, which may or may not be, or certainly not the same way as the Yom Tov, but it could be, but it's also called Ot. You cannot possibly have two Otot clashing with each other, because then you're going to produce disruption and disharmony in the Sephirotic realm. And therefore, you have to start thinking about when what, why, and where. Makes your life more complicated. Yes, Ian.
Well, there are two inconsistencies, aren't there, Rosh Chodesh? Because Hallel is also a siman of
I
Yom
wanted
Tov,
to say, why
and
would
and also the Kedusha. Why do we say Shachris Kedusha? Yeah,
Doesn't have Keter in. Keter is
yeah,
the top. It's the top.
not even Nagdishacha. It's just Shachris.
No. The
Kadesh.
Kadesh et Shimcha is very para, very Ashkenazi. Keter yitnu lecha, malachim hamone mala. Imamcha yisakivut mata is already God's tefillin, people's tefillin. It's Keter. You mention the word is like, it's like you're pressing something on your computer. Suddenly it goes crazy, starts to flash. That is Keter. If you believe in the Zohar, you believe in mysticism, that word. And that's why, well, all sorts of things that we can talk about if we really want to learn Kabbalah. Present, we're still in the introduction to the world of the Kabbalah. But the Radbaz, and this is what I'm very interested in, line 27 has the following to say. ויש בידי כלל גדול בכל דבר שנכתב בגמרא או באחד מן הפוסקים או בעלי הלכות, אפילו שיהיה הפך ממה שכתוב בספרי הקבלה. Now, the Radbaz says, I want to establish a rule. What happens when we have a clash between Gemara and Poskim and Halachot and what's written in the Zohar or what we have in the Kabbalah? Ani modeh bo velo echosh lama shekatuv be'echad me'otam hasfarim. I pay no attention to the Kabbalistic books. For me, Halacha is Halacha. Ulatzmi. As far as I'm concerned, im hu chumra ani noheg oto. If it's a chumrah, then I will often follow the Kabbalah because making life harder is religiously understood to be a good thing. Making life easier is not that good. Religiously, it's an aspect of religious and anthropology. The harder your life is, the more of a tzaddik you are. Of course, that's not necessarily correct at all. Vim kula lo achushla. Vim tomar, but the questioner could say, Hare minhag ze hefech hagemara, dinat tefillin kol hayom. According to the Gemara, we should wear tefillin every day. Correct? All day. All day. Don't take them off. So, it's against the Gemara to take your tefillin off before Musaf on Rosh Chodesh. As we'll see shortly, the Gemara does accept that on Yom Tov, like Shabbat, we don't put on tefillin. Okay? It does talk about the clash between otot, but not in the Kabbalistic way. Sefirot and producing disharmony, okay? So the Radbaz says, Halo kasha, not a kasha. Shem hayinu noagim kach, shapir ka'amarta, kevan shehen tzrichin guf naki, anu cholzin. Today, halakhically speaking, we don't wear tefillin all day. Some people do. The idea of wearing tefillin all day is that you are holy enough to support them, okay? Guf naki, I will also say no hesed hadat. Some people do. I've seen some rabbis, and there's famous image of the Chafetz Chaim wearing tefillin all day, but most of us don't feel that we're up to that level of standard. And therefore, there's no problem halakhically to take tefillin off too. Kol makom. And this is very interesting. Look at how the Radbaz paskins at the end. He actually chickens out. He says, "Mikol makom einani more la'adam lachlotz v'shelo lachlotz." You come to me with a shaila, I'll say, do what you want. I'm not going to tell you to take your tefillin off before Musaf. I'm not going to tell you to keep your tefillin on. You can do whatever you want. So in the 15th century, the practice that we all take for granted, come to Musaf, bang on the table, okay, everybody rushes, get their tefillin off in order to start the Amid, because you've said Chatzi Kaddish, you really shouldn't stop between Chatzi Kaddish and the beginning of the Amidah, but you've got this Kabbalistic thing that says no tefillin on Musaf, on Rosh Chodesh. So we do what we call in Hebrew Shminiot Ba'avir. We'll do all sorts of weird things. I mean, the mad tefillin unwrapping rush, which we all experienced before Musaf, right? So all of that, apparently, based upon Kabbalah. This is theurgic iconography. Al pi hasod, let's read from the Levush HaMalchut 32, Rabbi Mordechai Yafe. על פי הסוד כמבואר בשער הכוונות דף ל"ח. The Shara Kavanot, which if you go into Kabbalah in general, is written by the Ari, talks about the real meaning of the mitzvot. When I say real, I mean from a Kabbalistic point of view. It's an amazing work. V'chen ramaz lekach Bet Yosef. The Bet Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo, is a Kabbalist. And we're going to devote, I hope, next week's shiur partly to him, or the last shiur, how he does both, lives in both worlds. Okay? שציין למה שכתב בסימן ל"א בשם הזוהר הקדוש. The Zohar, by the way, became a holy book from the time of the Ari, not before. Before that, there were, as we've read, highly critical statements about the Zohar. But the Ari HaKadosh made the Zohar HaKadosh into the Zohar HaKadosh. שם נאמר טעם שימים טובים ראש חודש הם בחינת תפילין של מעלה, God's tefillin. And because they are God's tefillin, Yom Tov and Rosh Chodesh, we don't put on our human tefillin because we want to rise to the pnimiyut and not stay at the level of the chitzoniyut. V'tzarich ani lohodia lashoel. Now this is Chacham Tzvi, also talking about, here we are already in the 17th century. Chacham Tzvi, Harav Tzvi Ashkenazi, was an interesting type. He was, of course, an Ashkenazi. So was his son, Yaakov Emden. But he fell in love with what he regarded as the true Sephardi tradition, that of the Rambam, Maimonides, rational, non-mystical, philosophically correct, and orderly, thinking in logical ways. And he adopted the suffix samach tet. He always signed himself off as samach tet. Now, what do you think samach tet means?
Faradi Tahor.
Faradi Tahor is what a real, but Ashkenazi wasn't as far. It can also mean Safna Tava, will come to a good end. Okay, so it's a play. He put himself as a samach tet because he really did love the method. His great opponent was, of course, Rabbi Yonatan Eibeshitz, who was an Ashkenazi, Mekubal, and Christians learned Kabbalah from Rabbi Yonatan Eibeshitz, which is why they didn't like him so much, possibly accused him of being a Sabbatean, because Christians were always looking for proof of the Trinity in the 10 Sefirot. Those God is one, but you can divide him up, which is why Christian Kabbalah to this day is a major interest on the part of Christians, and why it elicited very negative reactions from rationalist rabbis such as Rabbi Yehuda Aryeh di Modena, who wrote which book attacking the Zohar? Aryeh, Ari Nohem, the lion roars, if you remember, or not. Okay, now,
You have somebody like Madonna making a big deal of Zohar. It's not very
there
good.
we are. Yes.
Not very good Pirsum, is it?
Right. I wouldn't put Madonna into the category of a Christian Kabbalist because her knowledge of Kabbalah is about, well, okay, I'm not going to say anymore, but non-Jews are into Kabbalah. As I said, the origin of that was the fact that he looked very promising to bring Jews around to belief in the Trinity. Because if once you divide God up into bits and pieces and parts, then you've got a recipe for belief in the Trinity. In fact, the same thing was said by most of the opponents of the Zohar that we read in the earlier Shiurim. So let's see what Chacham Tzvi says. V'tzarich ani lohodia. Wow, time is just catching up on us. Lishoel, shemayu divrei hazor hefech me'ha poskim. What happens when you find a clash between the Zohar and the Poskim? Lo haya lanu lahaniach divrei ha-poskim bishvil dvarim hamurim b'sitrei Torah. We don't leave the Psak Halacha because of things that are secrets of the Torah. Ki ein lanu bidinim lehoraot esek v'nistarot zulati b'makom shesh machloket bein ha-poskim. And this is the machloket between the Poskim. Az nachon nismoch al hakrat hazor. Because the Zohar HaKadosh is Zohar Kadosh. By the time we get to the 17th century and we've gone through the Lurianic revolution, then the Zohar really has become a holy book. And also because of Rabbi Yosef Karo, it becomes a work that is of halachic significance. And as I said, we will have a look at that. But Rabbi Yosef Karo does cite the Zohar as a source for his halachic decisions. V'chen katav Harav Hagadol Morenu Harav Rabbi David ben Zimra. So the great Sephardi rabbi of Egypt, Radbaz, said, I will pay attention to the Zohar, provided that it doesn't contradict the Talmud and the Poskim. If you don't adopt that rule, Natata Torah kol echad ve'echad biyado, leilech achar havanato b'sefer Zohar, hatova hi imra'a. If you don't do that, and you say that the Zohar can override sikah, regular halachic decision-making, then you're going to have a very subjective, because nobody really understands the Zohar. Everybody takes a different take. So we're going to have a halacha totally disunited, okay? And because of misunderstanding of the Zohar, we've seen terrible things. Now, what terrible things is he referring to? Pratzot, pritzut on the sexual level, which false Mashiach did terrible things. Shabtai Tzvi, okay? So the Zohar, Kabbalah is very dangerous. You have to follow halakha. Normative halakha. Many people make absolute errors in the halakha when they follow the Zohar, Raya Mehemna, or the book of, in the Zohar said the Zohar is made of about 15 books. The Fi Datam Hamazohemet, the Perush Devra, their interpretation was infected by evil understandings. Okay? They don't understand. Oh, Baraya Mehemla, the Chaslahu la Balea Zohar, Baraya Mehemla, Me'alot al Datam Adarim Ahema, and Chas v'Chalila, the authors of the Zohar, never thought of those terrible things that these people did in the name of the Zohar, the false messiahs, Sabbateans, the Frankists, okay, and all of those people who deviate. I didn't want to write this, but I need to make it very clear that the mitchakmim lahorot hefer dat rabotena poskim zal al mishenet kaneh chokhmat Zohar kadosh. Those people who prefer the Zohar to normative halakha, asher dvarav stumin v'chatumim be'elef izkain. The words of the Zohar are impossible to understand for most people, and there are 1,000 chains or handcuffs around them. They never understand the thing to its depth. Hashem hatov yichaper, may the good Lord atone for their sins. Okay, that's a Chacham Tzvi. The Mishnah. If you want to speak, Jean, speak.
Maybe we should add that Chacham Tzvi was orphaned during the Gezerot Tach, and then he fled and he learned with Chachamim Sfaradim, and this was and that is the reason why he was so influenced by them. I think that his first rabbinical degree was given by a Chacham Sfaradi, therefore he said he was sad.
Chacham Tzvi, as I said, fell in love with the Sephardi way. He called himself Chacham, okay, which is then an expression of rationalism. There's a famous joke they used to tell in Israel many years ago. There's a bus going from Tel Aviv to Netanya, okay, and the bus is full. There's only one seat. It's next to a woman, okay. Woman sitting on the inside, one spare seat. A Rav Ashkenazi with his hat and his frock coat gets on, looks at the seat, looks at the woman, and says, I'm going to stand. Few stops later, a Sephardi Rav gets on, looks at the seat, looks at the woman, says, Shalom, and sits down. The bus driver, who's very curious, turns around and says to him, how come that the Ashkenazi Rav wouldn't sit because he's very frum, and you a Sephardi Rav, why do you sit? He says, well, the answer is because he's a Rav and I'm a Chacham. So that's the, the Chacham Tzvi. He definitely fell in love, and he passed that love on to his son, Yaakov Emdin, who wrote Mitpachat Sfarim, if you remember, that blistering critique of the Zohar. Okay, with that we refer to. Thank you for that. I haven't talked about where he was. He was a rabbi in Hamburg and in Altona, actually Ahu. Altona, Hamburg, and Wandsbek were one for a very powerful Jewish community. Then he became the Rav. Then he had a fall-in with Rabbi Yonason Eibeshitz about the heartless chicken, the question of kashrus, a chicken that didn't have a heart. And Eibeshitz was very critical of Chacham Tzvi, was very offended because Chacham Tzvi said it's irrational to believe that the chicken cannot have a heart. A normal chicken must have a heart. And Eibeshitz says, well, perhaps the power of the heart was located in this one chicken in the world, the different organ he cites, Kabbalah and Zohar. Anyhow, it's a whole story that would again take me another hour, and we got 2 minutes left. So let's just read the Mishnah Brura, and then I'll go back to share screen. כתב הכנסת הגדולה, בכללי הפוסקים, כל דבר שבא להקבלה בזוהר חולקין עם הגמרא והפוסקים, הלוך אחר הגמרא והפוסקים. So the rule is that when there's a machloket, we follow our Gemara and we follow the poskim, we follow the rational line of halakha. Mihu, however, in balei Kabbalah machmirin, yesh lahachmir. If a Kabbalist makes life more difficult, then the Mishnah Brura is always wants to get in as many sources as possible. And of course, by now we are in the world of the Zohar HaKadosh and the Ari HaKadosh, and everything they say should be taken. But there's no problem. If you want to make your life more difficult, you can. I mean, Pesach, the Zohar makes a big deal of Chametz being Sitra Achra, Satan. So you want to get rid of Satan, so you get rid of all your Chametz. But then what happens if a little drop of water falls on your matzah? Gebrockt. That's a big problem. So what you do if you're a chassid, you'll eat the matzah in such a way that nothing, no liquid from your nose, for example, can drop on the matzah that you're about to eat. Those people will go to extremes. I don't know if anybody's been to a Chabad Seder. Has anybody been to a Chabad?
Not yet.
Seder. You look at their meals on, say, they eat with like sort of a kind of a mask, okay? So no liquid from anywhere. Like they eat, Debbie says they eat like horses, okay? From a nose bag, okay? So all of this is translating, so as I said, hypostasis and theurgic iconography. We're going to read some interesting stuff next time because we didn't finish. The next thing is actually a critique of Sefer Hakana, and then we're going to go into the major subject of tefillin on Chol HaMoed. Hands up, those who still wear tefillin on Chol HaMoed.
The Yekkers do.
Yekkers do. Jean, do you?
No.
No, you're a Kabbalist after all. Let's stop the share screen.
I take the best of both sides.
You take the best of both sides. I must say, I am shocked. Ani lo ma'amin lemishma oznai, that you would not wear tefillin on Chol HaMoed. The halacha, the Rosh, the famous Rosh says you wear tefillin, of course. But we're going to have a look at how the Kabbalah got absolutely obsessed with the idea of the ot of the Chol HaMoed and Yom Tov and the ot of tefillin, because at a Kabbalistic level, if you mix the two, it's dynamite and you might explode.
But not in Israel. In Israel, we don't wear tefillin. No one wears tefillin in Israel.
Exactly. In Israel, no one wears tefillin on Chol, because on that issue, the Kabbalah of the Sfaradim and the Kabbalah of the Ashkenazim and the Talmidim of the Gra was a Kabbalist as well, okay? The Rabbi of Shklov, who came here Nachum Mendel of Shklov, the student of the Gra. This was one of the Kabbalistic items that became part of the Talmidei Hagra, and it spread right through Israel. There is a possible exception if you live in Chutz La'aretz most of the time and you come to Israel, you can stand at the back of the shul out of sight and put on your tefillin, but try not to be seen. Okay? But in Chutz La'aretz, as a boy, I remember we always put on tefillin. Shmuley, I assume the same thing in Manchester. But we took them off. Now, some took them off before Hallel, some took them off after Hallel, some took them off in the middle of Hallel. But all of this is all because of Kabbalah, as we'll see next time. So I'm going to repeat what I said, but we are going to send this out, and I am going to have a chat with Mickey and Yael. Next week, we will meet and we will continue and finish this Shiur number 14. I think we have enough to do, and I want to say a little about Rabbi Yosef Karo, and perhaps more about him in the last Shiur before Rosh Hashanah, 25th of September, and then we're into Rosh Hashanah and the Chagim, Sukkot. After that, it's up to the people. Vox populi, vox Dei. Okay, so we will see what happens. We'll have some discussions, and have a couple of ideas, and we will share them. All being well, after we have Busurot Tovot, Yeshuot, V'nechamot, which we always hope and pray for every single day. That's it for this evening. Are there any comments? Would anybody like to share something?
It's